a farmer in a field sees two monsters trying to get through a fence, snakes. And one is a snake that has one head and 100 tails, and one is a snake that has 100 heads and one tail. And one that has 100 heads, each head tries to go through a different opening in the fence, and it's hopelessly stuck. The one that has one head and 100 tails, the head goes through and all the tails follow.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hello, rock stars. It's Lid Shaw, your host for Recording Studio Rockstars, the show bringing you inside the recording studio. I created this show to introduce you to real-world recording professionals, to hear their stories and learn from their experiences so that you can take your records to the next level and be a rock star of the recording studio yourself. My guest tonight is Mark Rubel, the co-director of education and instructor at the Blackbird Academy, which is an intensive recording school at famed Blackbird Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Since 1980, Mark has made about a zillion recordings at his Pogo Studio in Champaign, Illinois, currently reopening here in Nashville, including such artists as Alison Krauss, Bennett, Ludacris, Adrian Belew, Melanie, Fall Out Boy, Duke Special, and many others. Mark has taught audio, music business, and other subjects at the college level since 1985 and presents audio panels and workshops for various schools and professional organizations around North America. He writes occasionally for recording magazines, including his tape-op interviews with Les Paul and Terry Manning, with more coming soon. And Mark also works as an audio consultant and legal expert witness. His band, Captain Rat and the Blind Rivets, has been rocking East Central Illinois and beyond for 35 years and counting. Mark continues to cultivate students, cats, songs, and friendships in the new center of the universe, Nashville, Tennessee, right here, along with his saintly wife, Nancy, and their intrepid guinea pig, Huckleberry.
Huckleberry.
So that intro is actually borrowed directly from Mark's bio, and it was so good I didn't feel a need to change a single word. I'm also feeling a little bit like a 7-year-old kid at Disney World right now, because we are lucky enough to be doing this very interview from right here at Blackbird Studios in the amazing George Massenburg control room, which I would describe as looking a bit like an inverted Death Star, and I'll explain more here in a minute. Please welcome my guest, Mark Rubel. Mark, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I'm ready to rock.
Awesome. So, Mark, thanks for joining us, man. It's really a pleasure to be hanging out with you.
It's an honor and a privilege. Thank you for asking me, and congratulations on what you're doing.
Thanks, dude. It's been a lot of fun, man. The podcast has been very well received. So it's been a lot of pleasure to make it.
Well deserved.
So, Mark, I know you to be a very chill dude. I'm gonna bring my tone down a little bit and just chill here with you at the Blackbird Studio. Can you, I've done my best to actually, in your own words, to introduce you. Can you tell us a little bit more of who you are and how you got started in music?
Well, I got started as a bass player. Started at age 12. I've been playing rock and roll since 1970 and played all sorts of different kinds of music. My father was a well-known mathematician, a scientist, and my mother was a journalist. And I think when you put those two things together, you get the combination of science and portraiture, and you get recording. So I have lived all over the world, or in various places around the world, but mostly in Champaign, Illinois, which is a wonderful campus town with an amazing music community, sort of like a very small version of Nashville, but incredible musicians and a wonderful place. And this is my 35th year of having a studio and making records. It's my 30th year of teaching audio, and I've also taught other things, music business and the history of rock and roll, to college students. I've had thousands of college students, and they're all over the world.
Wow. And so you've got some college students that are grown up now, huh?
That's true. I have the somewhat absurd distinction this semester of having the first grandchild of a former student in my class.
Wow.
So, yeah, that makes you feel old.
That's impressive, man. Well, so a mathematician and a journalist, I have to imagine also that as a bass player, one of the things that distinguishes a bass from any other instrument in the band is that when the chord changes, you have to be there on the downbeat of the note, you know?
Sure. And, you know, bass players have a supportive role in a band. I think that's good training for being a producer, you know, that you're laying down the foundation, staying out of the way.
Yeah, yeah. And you can get colorful with a bass sometimes too, and you can kind of sort of, you know, describe the scene like a journalist, but like a mathematician, you've got to get it right. When you present your answer, you got to be on the right note there.
Absolutely.
Well, so Mark, I'd like to ask you to start us out with an inspirational quote. I know you brought something along with you.
This one is a little bit lengthy, but, you know, Jim Dickinson is a great influence on so many people, and he's been, I think, a great influence on recording in general. So I brought a fairly lengthy Jim quote since he's not here to say it himself. The unretainable nature of the present creates in man a desire to capture the moment. Our fears of extinction compel us to record, to recreate the ritual ceremony. From the first handprint cave painting to the most modern computer art, it is the human condition to seek immortality. Life is fleeting. Art is long. A record is a totem, a document of a unique, unrepeatable event, worthy of preservation and able to sustain historic life. The essence of the event is its soul. Record production is a subtle, covert activity. The producer is an invisible man. His role remains a mystery. During the recording process, there is an energy field present in the studio. To manipulate and to maximize that presence, to focus on the peculiar harmony of the moment is the job of the producer. Music has a spirit beyond the notes and rhythm. To foster that spirit and to cause it to flourish, to capture it at its peak, is the producer's task. Jim Dickinson.
Wow, that's impressive. That is a long quote too, but
sorry.
No, it's all right. I'm just thinking about it and all the different things he's talking about in there. You know, the idea of recording being a version of capturing a little bit of, you know, a taste of immortality. I mean, it really is. There's an archival quality to recording music.
I mean, you could shorten it to life is fleeting, art is long. I think that's the essence of it. I think that, you know, if we do this properly, we're making something that will outlast us and that captures the essence of who we are and our time and what we do.
Yes, and traditionally, so many artists have not really truly been recognized in their time, but become recognized for greatness later on. Do you think that's what we're looking at here, recording music and making records, that our work will be recognized for, you know, its greater greatness, its larger scope after we're gone?
It's possible. I mean, there are things that are recognized in their time, but I think that there are certain universals that do outlast us, and that are the things that will endure. I look at recording as being as much of an art as poetry or painting or sculpture, and I think the great recordings will be something that will nourish people in the future. I tend to think that it's essentially important what we do. I think despite the fact that humans are capable of doing awful things, that we're capable of doing wonderful things. And making music is one of the best things that a person can do. To be in a room with a bunch of people making music, that's a human being using their brain. Music uses the entire brain more than anything else that we do. And when you get multiple people in a room synchronizing their brains and putting them together to create something, that is magical and spiritual. And for us to be entrusted to capture it and to convey what that's about is, I think, a sacred thing. And so I think it's very important what we do.
Yeah, well, I like your description of music being a synchronization of brains. And I think that one of the things that's really special about recording music and recording groups of musicians in a studio or in a live setting or anywhere is getting to be one of those brains, hopefully in sync with the other brains. And
it's literally true. They put electrodes on people's heads while they're playing music, and they literally synchronize brain waves. So there's something larger going on. And if you think about that happening on the level of, say, an orchestra or a band, and that we as assistant music makers are able to be part of that too, that's amazing.
Well, speaking of synchronizing a lot of brains, can you tell us more about Blackbird Academy and what that's all about and what you do with that?
So I've been teaching audio for a very long time and doing it in my way. And I got to meet John McBride because I'd bring students down to Nashville from Illinois, and found a kindred spirit there. One day I was talking to him. Martina McBride was performing near Champaign, Illinois, the former center of the universe where I was living at the time. And the conversation was as follows. Hi, John, how are you doing? Oh, great. Studio's going fine. Everything's good. I'm thinking about opening a recording school. John, yes, I'm going to be your teacher.
Nice.
That was the discussion. And we almost started the school at that time, which I think was maybe 2009. And then it didn't happen then. And then in 2013, it did happen. And the impetus behind it is that he was getting a lot of people who had come out of recording schools who were unprepared to make records or really to be in a studio. They might have known something about a mixing console, but they don't know much about the essence and the importance of what's going on, which is that it's at its heart an interpersonal process. And so how to behave, how the process flows, how to fit in, how to communicate, when not to communicate, all of those essentials, how to listen, work ethic, all of those things. And he was frustrated that he was getting people who were heavily in debt with a recording education who essentially had no idea of how records are actually made. And as he said, you could get mad about it or you could do something about it. And we decided to create the recording school that we most wish we could have attended ourselves. I think if we had, we'd probably have been 10 years further along. Yeah. And so we've done that. It's what we call a mentor-based education. So I have my co-director is Kevin Becca, who is the technical editor of Mix Magazine and a great engineer and a great teacher. And we and like-minded people here at Blackbird, which is an amazing community of people who are at the top of what they do, have come together to train people in the way that I think is the best way to train somebody to be an artist, which is by example and by mentorship. It's a kind of a guild. And so we do that. They spend half their time in the classroom with me, which means tell them as much as I can about tools and techniques and so forth. But we try to cover so many other things where I talk about how to behave, what to say, what not to do, how to maintain one's own career, how to listen. We listen to music a lot. How to approach the process, how to think about the process, the historical context in which we find ourselves, what came before us, what goes after, any number of skills and information. And then we go places and we meet people and we bring people in, each of whom has their own career and can tell us, encapsulate, what they've learned over decades by talking to the students. And then we Skype with people who are out of town. And it's just an incredible thing. So I get to be with them for a week or two at a time. And then they go into Blackbird Studios, one of the finest studios that there's ever been. And they make records in real life conditions in a real studio with real consoles and amazing set of gear and people who know what they're doing. And then they come back and they learn more things and then they go apply it. So it's this combination of theory and application. And I'd have to say, when I was in Illinois, I loved teaching. I've always loved teaching. But I was generally the person in the room who knew the most about audio. And now, with all the people that we get to bring in and all the people we get to talk to, I'm learning so much all the time. I'm filling notebooks with information. I'm frantically scribbling notes and things to research further. It's been an amazing learning experience over these last 2 years.
Yeah, that's cool, man. What a great story. I was going to say, your personality and your tone is so gentle. It's so comforting. Have you found that has been something that's been a plus for you as far as working in the studio and interacting with people? And, you talk about the importance of being able to just be around the creative process and be part of it.
I suppose so. It's my, you can't really change your personality, but hopefully it's helpful to people. I mean, one of the things that I worry about is that I might be too low key in the cases where we need to have more energy and so forth. So I do have to consciously adjust my energy level depending on what we're doing. But I hope so. I really care. I really love music. I'm really devoted to the life of an artist and want to support musicians in what they do because I think it makes the world a better place. And I look at it as a great trust and a great responsibility to be able to apply what I've known and give it to other people, and to be able to help them to get to do what I've been lucky enough to do, which is to get to do what I love to do for a living, and to not have to have a real job. And I've somehow managed to carry that off up to this age.
Nice.
Which I'm thrilled about. So I look at it as a great responsibility. I take it very seriously, but also it's great fun, and we have a wonderful time.
So Mark, I love hearing your story about telling John that you're going to be the teacher for this school opening. Has that been a recurring theme for you at all in your career? Have you always had that kind of certainty and that, clarity of vision about making major decisions like that?
I think so. Since after I graduated from college, I had the very strange college major. I was an English literature major with minors in chemistry and theater, which all doesn't really make that much sense. And really, I treated it as an opportunity to have a true liberal arts education. I studied everything from the history of furniture and interior design to fencing
Nice.
and botany. And I had a strange time when all of a sudden I realized, holy crap, I'm going to graduate. I don't really know what's next. I went to a career counseling center and took the inventory exams and all of that. And I had this interesting experience where I came in and there was the job counselor. And he says, Mr. Rubel, we have your results. And you got 100% on musician, but everybody knows you can't make a living doing that. So moving on, and he turned the page. And at the time, it's like, oh, okay. And I think it was probably 6 months of, wait a minute, let's go back. What does that mean? I mean, there are people who are making a living doing these things. And from there, I think fortune found me, and it has been surprisingly linear in terms of, starting a studio with like-minded friends in 1980, what was really began as a kind of a hippie collective and turned into just me running a recording studio and accumulating things and creating an environment and trying to contribute to a community for a long time in Champaign. And I would very happily have stayed there for the rest of my life. So in brief, which as you find, I rarely give brief answers, but after I overcame that and really realized that a recording studio is a place that I love, and I love the process and I love the environment, and also the sort of hot rod aspect of it, that it's something you can fix up and tweak, and there's always more toys to accumulate and so forth. And that you're creating an environment and a world, which of course Blackbird is in itself. It's a little bit more Willy Wonka-like, or sort of like my place on, giant steroids. But so the short answer is yes. And I didn't really expect a big change at this late stage in life. And I suppose it was a brave thing for us, where I quit my university job with pension and benefits and all of that sort of thing.
Wow.
Sold the building that we owned, that we lived in, closed my studio, which was still thriving, and moved here without a contract or guarantee to start a school. But I didn't have to think twice about it. And fortunately, my wife is completely with me on this.
How about the cats?
The cats go where we go. They seem very happy where we are now. And Huckleberry the guinea pig is a happy guy too.
Huckleberry the guinea pig.
So we're all good. But
I want to steal that name for my next band if possible.
Yeah, he was named by Matt Rossbang. But I suppose it was a giant decision, and we were taking a great risk. But I didn't have to think twice about it. I'm so thrilled that we got to do it. I'm so excited that we have this palette where we can do it the right way, in the right place, and expose them to people that, that I can choose, who will be great influences on them. And it may be that the students will realize that something that Steve Albini said resonates with them. It might be 5 years from now that a light bulb will go on, but, we're really planting the seeds, and we're trying to create the future and shape the future of our craft. And partly because we feel so lucky to get to do what we do.
Yeah.
And also that's shared by all the many guests and mentors who come in. They feel a responsibility and a great joy in what they do. And I think they recognize that we're really passionate about what we do.
Well, so today, I think you said you had Steve Albini Skyping in to speak with you guys. Was that right?
Today we talked to Steve for 2 hours.
Share something from that. Was there anything sort of funny that Steve said, or anything sort of that sticks out?
Oh, always. We talked about some common themes with him, about why he doesn't like to call himself a producer and why he doesn't record to
I remember
computers
reading
and so on.
his description of calling himself a producer, and he said, to call yourself a producer, you would have to know what the lowest note was on a bass bassoon or something like that.
That's the bar of entry. You know, something that's very meaningful to me is that he talked about something that I really believe in, which is community. And, you know, and something that I guess I talked about more than he did. But is that I think the whole notion of DIY, which is supposedly a punk rock ethic, I think that's really a human ethic, and that it's that was the way that you did things before the Industrial Revolution. If you wanted something, you needed a tool, you had to make it. If you wanted to build something or something built, you had to do it. You didn't go to a store. And you group together with like-minded people and the people around you who are your community. And I think that he's really about that. I respect him greatly. I think he's probably the most ethical person that I know. Other people can say, "Oh, I would never take money from out of a musician's budget," or "I would never do this or work for a big record label." But he's a person who lives by what he believes. I think it's interesting that people get aggravated at him. I realize that he is part of what he likes to do is go out and antagonize people, I think, pretty much for fun, which is great and entertaining. But I think a certain amount of that is defensiveness, that people get angry with him because they think that he's commenting on them and they take that personally. And I don't think that's the way it is. I think he's talking about what he believes in and how he operates. And I respect him greatly.
Yeah, he's always had a very punk rock ethos. I mean, he was a young punk rocker starting out, which I think was in Chicago, right? That's where sort of he was.
Montana originally.
Coming up. And one of the things that I really admire about Steve, because I've worked with him up at Electrical, is at a time when bigger studios this is actually right when Blackbird was starting. So this was an anomaly at the time, but at a time when a lot of bigger studios were shutting their doors, and there was an idea that the traditional larger studio was going away and everything was heading towards, the individual DIY recordist or studio owner. Here was Steve starting in Chicago, right around the corner from you in Chicago, and starting his studio there. And he had a staff of 8 people in the studio. And I thought that was incredible. He had people you talk about the community aspect. He had a guy whose job was to do all the woodwork for the studio and build all the furniture. And, when they had an orchestra come in and they needed 20 chairs to seat the orchestra, Dave was, right? Dave was his name? Yeah. So Dave, his job was to go down there and build 20 chairs for the orchestra. And,
And we have a series of amazing people that come in. We talked to Ken Scott. We talked to Sylvia Massey yesterday. We have such a pool of interesting people that come through the studio and that live in Nashville, which is increasingly becoming the center of the recording world. And we get to go to Ben Folds' studio, RCA Studio A, and we get to go to Vance Powell has been incredibly generous. And he sort of gives what I'd say a sort of keynote address at the end. He's been really great with his time and taking mixes apart and, this is what I do and I put this after this. And it's inspiring that their attitude of other professionals is so giving. Yeah. And they're not trying to protect what they know, and they're not trying to keep secrets. They're really so generous. And I think it's because none of us feels very secure, for one thing. And I think also we recognize that it's so much about our personality and about how we hear and how we approach things that, we could go in and take the same microphone and measure the distance and mark our 1176s so we're in the same place. It's always going to sound like us, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, I can't ever set my 1176 the same way twice anyway, so I can't even imitate myself. Yeah. But I think one of the things that's so cool about the concept of sharing and sort of embracing the whole community in what you do professionally is it's ultimately very empowering. It basically comes back to say, you know what, the real contribution that you have to give to music, to recordings, to creating this art is you, the individual. Tools matter, but it's not about the tools. It's about you as the individual. So it's really ultimately very empowering, and it's just a huge compliment to the world.
And where better than at Blackbird Studio, where we have all the tools, to tell people that it's not about the tools. We make records with all 57s. We make records with cardboard boxes instead of drums. I do this project where I just give them 3 objects and they have to make a record out of it. It's kind of a musique concrète thing. So, here's a chopstick, a rubber band, and a balloon, and you have 6 hours to make a record. So, it's not just that we're teaching them to sit in front of $1 million console, because we recognize that although many of them do end up in big studios, and it's an asset to know that, and to know, I think, more importantly, to know where the bar is, to know what excellence is and what the finest things sound like. But we really have to convey to them that it's not about the tools, it's about them. And that's why I also try not to be dogmatic in telling them, this is the recipe, you have to record this way. And that's why I bring in so many different people who often say contradictory things, and they can gather from all of those opinions and all of that information. In the past, somebody would be an apprentice, maybe, and if they're lucky, they could sit in the back of the room and rush around and get coffee and sort of learn by osmosis by watching somebody do it. Here they have a variety of mentors, and it's focused on them. The session can stop and the mentor can turn around and say, are there any questions? And they can explain what they're doing, as opposed to, the session is king and has to move forward. So it's a nearly ideal situation. I'd feel so lucky to get to be here.
That truly is a challenge about teaching or trying to just even improve your own process, is that balance of when you're in the middle of a session and, the clock is ticking and you've got to get the job done. Sometimes it's really hard to slow down long enough to turn to an intern and answer a question, or even take your own personal notes about how you can make your own process better. And yet that's so key to making the whole process in a studio improve over time.
It's been so beneficial to my own recording to get to teach, because I can try things that are wacky and try things that don't work, and just experiment and try all sorts of different techniques when we're not on somebody's dime. And that's been great, and as usual, many of the experiments aren't successful, but the ones that are go into the arsenal and get to be retested. Well, I tried this 3 semesters ago and it really didn't work, but let's see if it works if we do it slightly differently. And so it really has helped my own recording a great deal.
Well, that's cool. So I kind of want to ask you this question about, I think it's a question about Blackbird, but it's also a question that relates to anybody with even a home studio dealing with an infinite number of tracks and plugins and options. At Blackbird, here we are, and I'm going to ask you to explain like this room that we're in too, but Blackbird is pretty unique in the world as a studio in that you literally have just about any microphone, any preamp, any compressor, any effects unit, any tape machine, any instrument, just about anything you can think of, even any studio, since there's, how many studios are here? Nine studios in the building. How do you take that? Because I've worked at Blackbird and I've done a mix here, and I think we probably should have been documented as an example of what not to do. So I think we spent 4 days mixing one song, and we still didn't even finish at the end of 4 days, because we thought, well, we have to hear every single thing on the kick drum, and then we have to try every single thing on the snare drum, which is absurd, and it's not really a way to work. But what advice do you have for people when faced with so many options to turn an unlimited number of choices into chopsticks, a rubber band, and a balloon?
Well, one of the things that I say about, for example, mixing is that you have to start with a vision. You have to start with a goal and an auditory vision in mind of what this song or this piece of recorded sound is going to be. And then you make all those decisions by comparing where you are to where you're trying to go. I think too many people start out with the details. I've heard about this compressor, I have to use this compressor, or, this engineer that I admire sets their compressor this way or that way, or they always start. So I think it's important to start with an idea and a concept of where we're going. What is the energy contour of it going to be? Is it going to start out small and get bigger and bigger? Is it going to start out big and then break down? To have the macro vision first. And it's much easier then to derive all the other decisions that you have to make by being fixed on a goal, as opposed to starting with all the details and somehow trying to derive a whole from that. I tell there's an Aesop's fable, which I will now tell you.
Oh, please share. Please share.
I'm paraphrasing, but he's been gone for a while. So, a farmer in a field sees 2 monsters trying to get through a fence, snakes. And one is a snake that has one head and 100 tails, and one is a snake that has 100 heads and one tail. And one that has 100 heads, each head tries to go through a different opening in the fence, and it's hopelessly stuck. The one that has one head and 100 tails, the head goes through and all the tails follow. And that's what I mean. If you have your eye on the star that you're following, you can derive all those other decisions from that point, and it keeps you from going down too many blind alleys.
Interesting. So we just want to be a snake with 100 tails.
That's my advice. Be a snake with 100 tails.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, so Mark, tell us about this space we're in. We're in a remarkable room that looks like none other in the world. Can you explain to our rock stars where exactly we are?
We find ourselves in Blackbird Studio C, also known as the George Massenburg room. It started with a concept in George's mind of a optimally diffuse room, a room where the distances between the walls are almost infinitely variable. So he came up with an algorithm that would describe a good way to randomize all of those things. He talked to John McBride about it, and George is probably the only person who could think it up, and John is probably the only person who would actually build it, and they did. And I was here when they were building it, and I remember them saying, it might not work, which is an interesting thing to say when you invest as much money as it takes to put it in. So people have probably seen a picture of this, but it looks like a whole bunch of sticks of different lengths. In fact, there are 150,000 and some. I don't know the exact number, but others could tell you. I counted them myself. No, I didn't. And they're all different lengths. And what it really is laminated, non-gas emitting MDF panels that have been cut on a CNC machine.
Yeah, there's enough gas in the studio already.
That's right. Yeah, especially with certain bands. And then the ceiling itself is also sort of looks like a diffuser, but it's I would call it a fractal diffuser, where you have big blocks that are different distances, and then they're covered with other smaller blocks at different distances. So George had the algorithm in mind. They gave a piece of this MDF to a guy who cut it, and he said, well, this is great, but it would take me 4 years to cut all these pieces of wood. So they had to pay a guy over $10,000, I believe, to port the Excel spreadsheet into commands for a CNC machine, cut all these pieces of wood, laminated them. And the original idea was that it was going to be a one-room studio. You have George in here with digital recording setup and the band around him, no separation, no control room, and no studio. And he did a number of wonderful recordings here. I remember coming in, he had a band called the Subdudes, who I like a lot, nice, recording in here. And then when he moved to Montreal to teach, they put in a giant 160-channel SSL 9000 plus. And it is actually on wheels, so you can push the thing around, as giant and heavy as it is. There are 4 racks of fantastic outboard gear, which can also be pushed around. There's a 5.1 ATC monitoring setup. And I confess that during lunch times, when this room isn't in use, I sneak in and just listen to music in 5.1. And it has been it's spoiled me for listening in other places. It's made it so that in my new Pogo control room, I think I'm going to put a 5.1 system in just for recreational listening. Some of these Elliott Shiner surround mixes are great. And so for a while, I think people didn't know what to do with it. And then they were mixing in it more and more. And now we're starting to see people recording in it more and more again. And they did some of the Blackbird drum library in here. Drums sound amazing in here. As you said, at the inverted Death Star, some people get seasick looking into these sticks because you don't realize how dependent you are for your eye to fix on a boundary to tell you where you are. And so your eye is telling you, well, the boundary's there, no, it's there, no, it's there, no, it's there. And some people get slightly motion sick. So although George is unhappy about it, there are some drapes that can be pulled across the sticks in case it makes people woozy. It's just one of the most amazing sounding rooms. It's not that it has no acoustic; it just has a very neutral acoustic. And there's a story. One of the great piano studio musicians here is blind, Gordon, and he came in and walked into the wall because he's used to hearing echolocation, hearing a signal come off of it. So. It's a fantastic environment. It's aesthetically beautiful. It's acoustically marvelous and unique.
So now, can we maybe include in the show notes any links to people if they want to go listen to some of the recordings that have taken place in this room?
Yes.
Can we find some of those?
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of them. There's a Alan Jackson record called, I think, Like Red from a Rose. It was produced by Alison Krauss. It was a beautiful sounding record, and it was at least mixed in this room. And I know there are various Massenburg recordings that were done, so we'll find them in.
All right, great, yeah. You're not on the spot to have them on the top of your head, but we will definitely include them in the show notes, Rockstars. So please remember to go look at that. It'll be recordingstudiorockstars.com/ whatever episode this is. I don't know yet, but we'll find out. So you'll find them there. So, Mark, let me take you into some other questions here. Let's just jump in. So tell us about something for you. You know, you described how you started at Blackbird Academy, and it really sounds like, you know, you just knew exactly what you needed to do next. But tell us about, you know, I know you're human. Tell us about an important failure for you along the way that everything turned out to be okay in the end. I mean, clearly it's okay. We're here having this conversation now. And
so thrilled to be here. Well, I had made a record that was a little bit more heard than most of the records that I make, which are generally not known nationally. And I got a call from an A&R guy from Los Angeles saying, I heard your work and I want you to consider doing this record from an English band. And I didn't respond. That was a stupid thing to do. I think it was the classic fear of failure, or maybe fear of success. I would say probably the latter. And that was I failed to respond, and who knows where that might have led. So it was just, you never responded, or you just sort of took you too long to do it? I think I took too long, and I think I was dragging my feet and maybe, you know, too comfortable in my middle-sized college town. That was a stupid thing to do. I've certainly done that myself. Yeah. It's funny when you look at it and you realize there are some things that come along and you just sort of put them in the back of your head. You think, I'll get to that later. Yeah, I get mad at my clients when they do it, and then I did it myself. So I regret that. Well, so what advice do you have for anybody who, you know, how do you deal with that? How do you not make that mistake? Or how do you address it despite the fact that it happens anyway? Sure. Well, I think it's important to maintain optimism and energy and passion, and to be aware of how lucky we are to get to make music. And to get to make recordings and to really value that and treasure it. And I think it's also important to be optimistic and enthusiastic. That's contagious. It helps the musicians and everyone else you're working with, and I think it helps one to get forward in the world. So, as I've said before, you know, I see people, well, what are you doing? Oh, I have to go record, or I have to go make a record. I consciously say, I get to make a record. I get to record. I get to make music. How wonderful is that? Optimism. So one of the things that I see in your work that is clearly optimistic, I would call you a king of social media. You are a master of hilarious Facebook posts and tweets and things. Well, certainly Facebook. I'm not sure if I've been following your Twitter yet, but not on it. Well, there you go. That's the answer to that. But often I'll see you just posting some picture where you're celebrating with the students. You know, you're always in this sort of, there's clearly a celebration going on over at the school. So, you know, tell us a little bit about that. You know, you kind of did share a moment of success, the way that you came down here and started the school. And clearly, if you started out from a place of fear of failure and you wouldn't respond to an opportunity, by the time you met John McBride in Chicago and started the school, you were not afraid. You either weren't afraid to do this or you just faced it head on, which is a pretty cool thing, you know? But tell us a little bit more about your experience, you know, that kind of the positive nature and the encouragement of working with the students, just, you know, the celebration. I don't see how anybody could not love it. I think it's a chance to help somebody find their way to do something that they love to do, even if they don't all end up becoming recording engineers. I think that the experience of being around excellence, of being in a place where we're surrounded by people who are the best at what they do. And by the way, I don't mean that recording or art is some kind of a competition, and that by somebody being great at what they do, that means they're better than anyone else. But to be around people who are great at what they do, that informs and enriches our lives. And I also think that there's a kind of a ripple effect. If you can help somebody to get in a position where they can make music in a positive way, and they can help other people, and then they can mentor other people, that sends ripples into the world that really do help to make it a better place. And so that's, I don't have children and won't. And this is I would say my legacy. As my wonderful friend Tommy Wiggins says, we're producing producers.
Nice.
And I subscribe to that, and I love that. I mean, how could we not be thrilled? So Sunday we're going to Memphis. I'm taking the students. We'll go to Royal Studios. We'll go to Sun Studios. We'll see Scott Bomart, Electrophonic. We'll go to Phillips Recording, where Sam Phillips, the man who invented rock and roll, made his dream studio. We get to meet fantastic people like Jeff Powell and Matt Ross-Spang. And we get to eat wonderful barbecue.
That's cool. Are you going to go to Ardent as well?
Probably not this time around.
Not this time. So when you go to Phillips' studio, where Sam Phillips was recording, keep your eyes peeled for any pictures of Roscoe Gordon. Do you know Roscoe?
I do, with his rooster Butch.
Yes, rooster. The chicken, the rooster that he toured with Butch, when he had a hit song, The Chicken. He was the first guy to record for Sam Phillips, and I was honored and lucky enough to be the last guy to make a record with Roscoe.
Wow!
So I actually made his final record. It's called No Dark in America. He's just a great guy. That's a long story. I can tell you about that later, but super cool guy. And Butch the chicken, he used to, in order to get it dancing around, I think he tied a little bit of it was like a loose little red collar around his neck. And so it would try and shake that off and it moved around a lot. And then he said he always put a thimble full of whiskey on top of the piano and it would dip its beak in, and that would keep it going.
Yeah. Roscoe and Butch would wear matching suits, and Roscoe would play and Butch would boogie. Yeah.
What was the famous film? It was like Rock Rock Baby or something like that, I think, that had he and Butch the chicken in it. All right. So tell us, Mark, something that you're just really excited about right now. What's going on with you that you're just psyched about?
I'm going to reopen my studio.
Awesome. Tell us about that.
Well, I had my studio for 33 years and accumulated all manner of interesting instruments. And, I have an API Domidio console, which is a beautiful thing. It was the custom built to make Creedence records on. And I have a giant pile of interesting things, and they've been in storage while we've been getting this school off the ground. But I feel as though we are solidly off the ground now. And I also think that's essentially important in order to teach, to be engaged in the thing that you're teaching. So we bought Steve Earle's old studio. It was owned by Steve Earle and a guy named Ray Kennedy, who's a great producer here in town. And it's a beautiful place. We have a beautiful house. And then it's got a big recording studio that's a separate building. It's bigger than Pogo was, custom built from the ground up as a studio. So, already with the non-parallel walls and soundproof. It's a big room with 3 ISO booths. Has a great history. John Mellencamp, Lucinda Williams, Ray Davis, and Steve Earle and various other people recorded there. And my stuff is in there. And I think around the first of the year, I'm going to start wiring it together. I've got, not having a studio open for the last couple of years doesn't mean I haven't been accumulating more stuff as I do. So I'm really excited about that. I'm just looking forward to getting back in and having my own environment. And I actually think that there's going to be a place for it in Nashville. Opening another recording studio in Nashville is maybe not the greatest.
It's the greatest, dude. It's the greatest.
Is it?
Come
good.
on.
I'll take your word for it.
Nashville's awesome. It defies logic that you can have as many people doing music and recording in studios, and yet the more there are, the more there is to go around.
In my experience here, traveling around and getting to show the students all these different places, we're in Berry Hill where there are 60 recording studios in a square mile. My place is still unique. And so I'm looking forward to getting it going. And then once I really have it shaken down and all together good, then I'll tell people about it. My focus will always be on the school foremost, but I'm looking forward to getting my hand in and making music and records, and also getting to bring the students out and show them, a different setup too.
Well, let me ask you this. So there are a lot of listeners who maybe have home studios. They might be thinking about creating their first recording studio environment, whatever it is. What are some of the considerations to somebody, who's faced with, maybe they're going to do a little bit of build out, or maybe they just need to treat a space. Maybe they're in a rental or a home. What's some basic advice you have to somebody who's starting out their first studio?
Here's something that I tell my students often. That people get influenced by magazines or interviews with people, and they think, oh, I can't record if I don't have this piece, the XYZ 9000 or whatever it is.
Oh, I love the XYZ 9000.
That's a good one, especially the early ones are better.
Have you heard one of those in this room
They
yet?
sounded warmer. But, they think that if they don't have some particular tool, they can't make records. And it just doesn't work that way. So what I tell them to do is to invest in capability. In other words, there are some things you can't do without. And the main things are good monitors and a good listening environment. You can have all the best equipment in the world, but if you can't hear what you're doing, then you're just groping in the dark. So that is a hard thing to substitute for. But if you only have headphones, then work on headphones. So I would say start where you are with what you have, and then apply yourself, and then evaluate your work and figure, what is it that I need to do? What's the next thing that I need to do better? And then make your decisions from there. It's like, I'm just not getting good vocal sounds, and that points you to the fact that maybe you need a better microphone or a different microphone. I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time controlling dynamics. That might mean you need a compressor. I'm having a hard time hearing what I'm doing. You might need acoustical treatment or a speaker, but buy the capability and not the piece of equipment.
Yeah. Another thing that I think that people grapple with is this concept of soundproofing. That issue gets so confused. The idea of foam on the walls and what that does versus a heavy wall that prevents sound from going through to the other room and isolating instruments. What advice might you have to somebody about the importance of isolation or soundproofing? What does that mean?
Well, so there's soundproofing and there's acoustic treatment, and those are different things. So soundproofing is keeping the sound that you have inside so you don't annoy your neighbors and get shut down, which is important. And so that you don't have an intolerable amount of sound from the outside coming in and getting on your recordings. On the other hand, if you're recording rock and roll bands and you've got a microphone that's several inches from a drum kit, you don't really need to spend a lot of money soundproofing it. If you're recording people breathing on harpsichords, as we all do, then you need a soundproof environment. One of the things that's odd about it is that soundproofing and acoustical treatment to make a good sounding room are actually kind of antagonistic to each other, because the more you soundproof the room, and by the way, the ways to do that are making it airtight, having a lot of mass, and having different materials that have different resonant qualities so that even if sound gets through one layer, it doesn't get through the rest of it. But the more soundproof it becomes, the more it traps the sound in the room and the more you have to contend with. One of the greatest tools that we have, acoustically speaking, is transmission. The sound goes through the wall and doesn't come back, and then we don't have to do all the things that we end up doing in small rooms, putting in bass traps and putting in foam and so forth. People tend to overly damp rooms. It wears out your ears. It sounds unnatural. It's hard to make good sounding records in there. So, start where you are and put some speakers in it, and it may be fine. And if it isn't, then treat it rather than sort of going in with some predisposed method of how you've seen controls or been told that control rooms should be, or studios for that matter.
Have you found that if an instrument sounds good to your ear in a space, then you can get a great recording of that instrument in that space?
That's one of Rubel's laws.
I like that. Tell us some more Rubel's laws.
Well, so that particular Rubel's law is the following, which is, how do you make a great sounding recording? You make a great sound and you record it well.
Nice.
And it's faster, it's cheaper, it's more musical. Well, it's not always cheaper, but how do you get a great drum sound? You have great sounding drums or well-tuned drums. A great drummer helps. But it turns out that with good instruments in a reasonable room and microphones that are capable of capturing it, if you know what you're doing, you really don't need a lot else. And I think that it's odd that it's become an unpopular approach to recording, where I think for my recordings, I spend 80% of the time on the recording. I try to get the recording right, and then the mixing process becomes trying not to mess it up. So I just fix whatever needs to be fixed and maybe a little bit of extra polish, and don't overthink it. And I think more and more that percentage is shifting for a lot of people, where it's 30% production, and then the rest is post-production. Oh, we're going to get any old drum sound, we get any old guitar sound. And then somehow through the magic of sample replacement and plugins and reamps and tape emulation, we're going to somehow transform this into something that's great. There are so many problems with that, that if you don't commit to a sound early on, then you're building the rest of the song on shifting quicksand.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to get to where you're going. If you just capture it well, you know what you have, and you build on that, Or you capture it all, imagine this, in one room at the same time, which is my favorite way to record, right? People playing in a
Nobody's
room
ever
together.
done that before.
It's a weird concept, I know. But, if you can imagine, if you will, people playing music on instruments in a room at the same time, maybe even, get this, without headphones.
Oh.
I know. It is mind-boggling. So much, the recordings come out so much better because then musicians can do what they do. Headphones, I say, are the enemy of music. If somebody hears themselves incredibly well and they don't hear everybody else, then they don't play sensitively. And
if you're a headphone manufacturer, you should not listen to this episode right now. Just press skip. Move on.
When people play together and they hear each other, then they will do all the things that need to be done to the recording automatically if they're good musicians. They'll lay back when somebody else is soloing. They'll play harder when it's time for them to be heard better. And then you don't get what passes for dynamics, which is somebody playing at the same volume being turned up and down, which is completely different from somebody playing hard and somebody playing lightly. What's the key to all the recordings that people love so much in those early recordings? Musicians playing in a room together and drummers playing lightly. And you might think, gee, how primitive, right? And how much control that takes away from us. Exactly. Let the musicians be in control of the music, capture it well, and let them use what are the greatest music computers we know of, which is between their ears.
Yeah, well, they also say, I've heard the expression that air is the greatest mixer of all.
I think that might have been Jim Dickinson too.
It might have been. I think you're right. All right, so I'm going to offer up, as a generous gift, I'm going to offer you up a new Rubel's Law for consideration, and it is fix it before the mix.
I like that.
Take it or leave it.
I like it.
Well, so let's pause here for a moment, and when we come back, we'll go into the jam session.
Fabulous.
Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks, and you get downloadable multi-tracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, Rockstars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. All right, well, I'm back here with Mark Rubel, and we're about to jump into the jam session. Are you ready to jam?
Totally ready to jam.
Awesome. That's the first time I've asked somebody if they're ready to jam, but
I'm always ready to jam.
Tell us, when you were starting out, Mark, what was something that was holding you back?
I think uncertainty and overthinking things and trying to be too practical. Thinking, I really love music and recording, and I really love being in a recording studio. But, I could never do that. That could never happen. That's not practical. I should get a law degree, which is where I was headed. I was actually going to law school or about to go to law school. It's that sort of thing. So I think maybe what held me back was what I've apparently overcome, which is just the ability to jump in and to take risks. And I'm glad I have.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that concept. If you're afraid of it, if it's fearful, it probably means that it's something you need to do. Sure. Now, this doesn't apply to crossing the street with your eyes closed.
But, sign this insurance waiver form. Yeah, but I think so. And there are good reasons to be to have fear about those sort of things. But and I'm not saying to be totally impractical, but I think that it's important to take that step. What's the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie where the leap of faith? You just step out, and then there's there's the glass step in front of you. And I very much did that coming here to Nashville. I'm so glad that I did.
Well, I think we've evolved as human beings to be afraid of things for good reason, but they used to be, they still are. You don't want to step off the edge of a cliff. You should be afraid of that louder sound because it might be the saber-toothed tiger about to bite your head off. But that fear translates a lot into the world we live in, which is in many ways quite safe. The decisions about whether or not you should do that thing that you think maybe you can't do, that's not usually life or death, So just push forward into it, right?
Yes.
All right. So sorry to go on and on with your answer, the follow-up there, but what about some of the best advice you received when you were starting out?
I think of advice that my father gave my sister. My sister is an artist and a painter, and he, was a theoretical mathematician, which is very close to being a philosopher or an artist. You might think of mathematics as a sort of dry thing, but it really involves creative leaps. And he said to her, as she was going through painting school, where there's an awful lot of talking and an awful lot of theory and a lot of information that surrounds the actual act of making art. And he said, the important thing about painting is painting.
Yeah, you go to the art museum and you see this big painting, and how often do you immediately look over at the little card that's written there on the side and read that to try and glean some insight, when all you really have to do is just look at the painting?
That's right. That's where the meaning is.
All right. So next up, Mark, how about a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce? Something that our rock stars could take home and use today.
I can't believe I'm about to give you a Pro Tools tip. Not always the most thrilling thing in the world. But this is a fun and I think pretty well hidden trick. When you're working on a particular, you're always working on at a particular place in a song. And you can locate to that, or you can put a marker there. But this is a way of creating a moving marker, which is the marker that is always what I'm working on now. And it is marker number 999. So here's what you do. You are at the place where you're about to record, and you hit period on the numeric keypad, 0, and enter twice. And on the marker's strip will appear marker 999. And from then on, whenever you want to go to the place where I'm working now, you go period, 0, period, and it will always take you there. So you might go somewhere else in the song. Oh, I need to work on this thing, or I'm going somewhere. It's like, okay, where were we? Period, 0, period.
So hold on, let me make sure I've got it right. So period, 0, period will take you back to the 999.
Correct.
And when you're at a place and you're about to leave it, but you want to come back to it, you drop that 999 marker before you go.
Sure. So, it's now we're going to go work on the second verse or the third line of the second verse where you might not have a marker for every line. If you want to move the 999 marker, it's period, 0, enter twice.
Okay, dig it. Nice, man. I like that.
That becomes a nice reflex because it's just, where we're working now, and you don't have to drop 1,000 markers and then, now we're at number 123 or whatever. So there's a Pro Tools tip for you.
Do you have any idea how easy it is to get lost when you're editing an 1.5 hour long podcast?
I can only imagine.
And you're just in the middle of some spot and you accidentally hit the enter button at the wrong time, and all of a sudden your cursor goes to the top of the session. Now you have no idea where you just were.
Now you know.
It's not much fun. Same thing goes for drums. All right, now how about a favorite hardware tool, something physical that you just love to have with you in the studio on a session?
Well, there are so many, and some of them are expensive and hard to find. So let me mention a few very affordable things, which are along lines of inexpensive microphones. Believe it or not, Akai, A-K-A-I, made little microphones that go with reel-to-reel tape decks. They're unbalanced, so you need to plug it into a direct box. They start with an ADM. There's an ADM 9, an ADM 11, an ADM 13. They average about $10 a piece on eBay. They're quite good and interesting. They make good drum mics to squash.
Awesome.
And we do a lot of shootouts at Blackbird, which is really fun, where they're blind shootouts. So I put up a whole bunch of microphones, And the students record them all. They don't know what's what. And then we make the same sound into all of them. And you'd be amazed how the Akai will outdo microphones that cost $400, sometimes thousands of dollars. And there's another one that I recommend, which is a remarkably good microphone and often wins shootouts over mics that cost many times more. Believe it or not, it's the Nady Star Power series. So I have SP5s, which I paid $995 for. And they will outdo much more expensive microphones very frequently. So there's some affordable stuff.
What are they? Star Power series?
SP5 and
Nice.
SP9s. They're $10, or I think the expensive ones are $14.95.
Man, I love it. I'm going to get a whole studio outfitted with those.
They're great. You know, I got them as utility stunt mics because I do things like some of my wacky drum miking techniques involve using the microphones as drumsticks.
Nice.
And so my pair have been used to smash cymbals and pound on drums. And they still outdo many other microphones. They're neodymium dynamic moving coil microphones, very durable. They sound remarkably good.
That's awesome. There was a great Facebook post recently, and it was a picture of an AKG D112 set on top of a drum beater. So it was the kick drum beater.
Yeah.
It said like best kick drum sound ever or whatever.
Yeah, I do that. We do the incredible disappearing drum kit in class. And I start replacing the drums with boxes and cases and so forth. And then at some point, it's a beater directly onto a Beta 52. And it sounds remarkably bass drum-like. So
That's great.
It's fun to be creative.
All right. How about a favorite software tool? Something inside the computer that is just great in the studio?
Oh, there's so much. Well, I like the emulations of the Transient Designer. I think that's a great thing. I've gotten to like, I didn't have one in my studio, and I've gotten to like those.
Like the SPL plugins?
Yeah. That's a highly useful thing for getting drums to speak.
Yeah. I actually have the Deverb plugin.
Yeah.
And I would typically be using it on the podcast, but I think in this room, I won't be using it on the podcast. Okay, cool. So can you explain what a transient designer is for people who don't know what that is yet?
It's an interesting device that has two knobs, attack and release, and it actually changes the attack time and release time of things. So you can use it to make a bass drum poke through more or less. You can use it to lengthen or shorten a snare drum. I typically use it as a parallel plugin, so I keep the unprocessed, typically drum, and then I'll have the Transient Designer as a parallel plugin where you can accentuate the attack of it to help it to speak more in the mix, or to lengthen or shorten it, because the length of notes is so important. Everybody's always obsessed over where the note begins, but how long a note lasts has so much to do with the way everything feels.
Do you ever just get sick of parallel processing? I'm like, enough already. It's like, it seems like everything's parallel compression, this and that. Do you ever just feel like, let's just put it through one compressor and be done with it?
That is very much the trend. I honestly don't do very much parallel compression. It's the kind of thing that works amazingly for people who are great at it. And it has a tendency to make things mushy for me. I tend to use processing in response to a need and not reflexively. I don't just use it because I read that somebody does it or because other people do it. So I tend to do really more serial processing, inserting a compressor on something that needs it.
So rock stars, just because Mark Rubel said that you should check out this trick doesn't mean you have to do it. All right. So how about a great resource for the business side of music?
A great resource for the business side is a guy named Joe Montorello. He has a company called the Studio Insurance Program, something that we don't think about, but that is a very real necessity for a recording studio of any size. He's a great resource, and his program, I think, is excellent and allows for things like, in the unfortunate event of something happening to a studio, they have money for things like acoustically treating a new space or lost hard drives and things like that. So it's good to have somebody who specializes in our profession. I've been very happy with him. They insure Blackbird as well as my studio and many other places.
Yeah, I know Joe. I've been working with him for years too.
Yeah,
Great
he's
guy.
Awesome.
Thank you for bringing that up.
My
It's a
pleasure.
Great tip. So now here comes the hypothetical question. If you were dropped into a strange city, you started out in some new town. Sounds like you did that recently. But
Does
of course, you
sort of feel
came
that
here
way.
with a plan. Let's say you went someplace and you didn't have a plan yet, and you needed to take a simple setup to record with. You wanted to find people to work with, collaborate, record, and in the meantime, you needed to make ends meet so that, you could eat and sleep and have a place to live. What would you do? How would you find those folks, and how would you make ends meet?
An interesting question. Well, as far as equipment, I suppose, whatever was at hand, I could be very happy with an Apollo and a laptop and a number of reasonably good microphones. Where would I go to find people? I would go to where the artists congregate. I suppose that means coffee shop, now that I think of it. But, you can find like-minded people. And how would I make ends meet? That's difficult to say. I suppose maybe I would teach, which is a wonderful adjunct to the insecure life of a recording artist or a recording engineer.
Now, let's say rewind many years and you don't know all the things you know yet. Imagine you're a young student who's starting out. What about making ends meet and getting started that way, where you need some time to learn this craft? And
are we talking about way back then, just after the Boer War, or in the current day?
How about current day?
Current day. I think and these are not the most thrilling things in the world, if you can edit well, especially editing drums, if you know how to tune vocals, which is what it is, I think there's actually work in that sort of thing. And we have a student, a graduate, who I'm very proud of all of our students. She's apprenticed to a piano tuner. I think that's a brilliant idea because you get to go into a lot of studios, you get to meet a lot of people, you develop your hearing, and you have a marketable skill where, you could make $300 before lunch. If you can get $100 for tuning a piano, if you can go into 3 places and tune them. And in recording situations, the pianos need to be tuned often. So that would be an interesting skill.
And based on a lot of sessions, you're going to get the $300 before breakfast because those sessions might start early in the morning anyway.
Yeah, of course, John McBride says, nobody in their right mind would record before noon, but we do see it happen here.
Right on. All right, so Mark, here we're going for the big, tough question.
Oh, boy.
What's the single most important thing somebody can do to become a rock star of the recording studio?
I would say to be alert and alive. To be engaged and curious, and to be always listening, and always paying attention to every kind of art. So you have to be passionate and love music and not just the one thing that you're into. I think to have a wide taste in music, to be omnivorous, and to listen to everything, and to listen to, and when I say everything, I mean everything, like sonic environments, people's voices as music, and to be completely engaged and passionately devoted to what you do, and to study the other arts, because this is an art and it's a method of self-expression. So if you want to know how to make a great record, you have to learn how to tell a story well. So you should study literature and poetry and filmmaking, right? How are things lit? How are they edited? How do they portray an individual? How are they presented? How do you keep and direct the viewer or listener's attention? How do you tell a story? How do you engage people emotionally? And whether that's a painting or photograph or a sculpture, it's all very analogous to what we do. So I would just recommend to always be curious and always quest to learn more. There's never an end to it.
I like your answer. You didn't really talk about listening to records. It's like you draw your inspirations from outside of the studio to know how to be the most effective in the studio. And also, as an appreciator of art and the son of a mathematician, that was a very creative answer and definition of what a single response would be for that too.
Thank you very much. What's the one dozen things that, yeah.
Nice, man. Well, Mark, so tell us, how can our listeners find you, find out more about this beautiful place and what you're doing?
Well, they can find more about Blackbird Studio at blackbirdstudio.com and about our school at theblackbirdacademy.com. We just try to let people know about what we're doing. We're rather non-self-promoting. We have a strange business plan, which is we want to do a great job and have our graduates be amazing people who will do well. And so far, so good. So we don't tend to be that self-promoting. And if people are in Nashville or coming through Nashville, they should feel free to contact me at any time. M. Rubel, R-U-B-E-L, at theblackbirdacademy.com. I'm happy to advise and happy to get to meet other people who are along the same path.
Well, now I don't want anybody to miss out on your fantastic Facebook posts. So are they just reaching out to follow you there, or is there a Blackbird Facebook page that they should be checking out?
There's a theblackbirdacademy.com. There's a the Blackbird Academy Facebook page, and I'm there under my own name.
Groovy.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, thank you, man. Thanks for taking time out and letting me into the studio. You know, not a lot of people do that anymore.
Lidge, it's such a pleasure to talk with you, and thank you for what you're doing.
Cool, man. Well, it's really a pleasure. And it's just so cool that you're working with grandkids of your previous students at this point. That's awesome.
It's remarkable.
Well, I will see you in the studio, and maybe we'll go out and get some food or something.
I love that idea.
All right, dude.
Thanks, Lidge.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.